as an entity started to suffer quite badly. And I think in the middle of the...
Eric Clapton earned the nickname Slowhand for his smooth guitar playing. But beneath his calm exterior burned a fierce temper that led to some of music's most legendary feuds. These weren't just minor disagreements between musicians, they were deep conflicts fueled by jealousy, ego, and sometimes genuine hatred that shaped the golden age of rock music. The Phil Collins collaboration crisis in the mid-1980s. Eric Clapton faced one of his most challenging creative periods when Phil Collins, then at the peak of his success with Genesis and his solo career, came aboard to produce Clapton's album Behind the Sun. On paper, it seemed like a perfect match. Collins was a hit-making machine, and Clapton needed to stay relevant in the changing music landscape. However, the collaboration quickly turned into a nightmare for Clapton. Collins brought his signature, polished, radio-friendly production style to the project, complete with bright keyboards and sleek arrangements that were designed to crack the pop charts. For Clapton, who saw himself as a blues purist, this felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for as a musician. The tension between the two men was palpable in the studio. Collins pushed for catchy, commercial arrangements while Clapton desperately tried to maintain his blues roots. Clapton later described feeling like he was being packaged and sold, saying it wasn't who he was or ever had been. The constant battles over the album's direction left him feeling like a stranger on his own record. The situation came to a head during the preparations for Live Aid, the massive 1985 global concert. While they appeared united on stage, behind the scenes there was a bitter fight over the set list. Clapton wanted to perform deep blues cuts that were raw and emotional, while Collins insisted on polished tracks that would dazzle the television audience watching from around the world. The pressure to conform was suffocating for Clapton. Later reflected on this period with deep bitterness, describing it as a time when he sold his soul for chart success. While Collins rode the pop wave to even greater fame, Clapton quietly distanced himself from the spotlight, retreating to rediscover the music that had originally defined him. Their relationship never fully recovered, and critics slammed the album's overproduction, with many fans and blues purists accusing Clapton of losing his authenticity. The explosive partnership with Ginger Baker as two-thirds of the legendary supergroup Cream, Eric Clapton, and drummer Ginger Baker created a sound that defined late 1960s rock. Their performances were explosive and groundbreaking, but so were their personalities and their fights. From the very beginning, the relationship was volatile and destructive. While Clapton admired Baker's drumming ability, he couldn't stand the man himself. Baker, on the other hand, saw Clapton as weak-willed and too eager to bend to commercial pressures. The tension escalated quickly, with Clapton once telling a crew member before a major gig that either Baker would leave or he would, and he wasn't making idle threats. By the time Cream embarked on their 1968 farewell tour, the situation had become toxic. Clapton and Baker could barely be in the same room together. Some recording sessions had to be held in entirely different studios just to prevent the two from coming to physical blows. Even on stage, the hostility simmered beneath the surface, with glares exchanged mid-performance and icy silences during breaks. Strangely enough, their resentment may have been part of what made their music so powerful. The rage and disdain spilled into their playing, giving songs like White Room and Sunshine of Your Love a tense, electrified edge that few bands could replicate. However, when Cream finally disbanded, Clapton wanted nothing more to do with. Baker fans hoped for a reunion for years, but Eric flatly refused multiple times whenever Ginger was involved. In private conversations, he referred to Baker as a loose cannon and a nightmare in human form. Even when they eventually performed together briefly in 2005, insiders described the atmosphere as strictly business. No laughter, no warmth. Just two men tolerating each other for the sake of nostalgia. Baker, never one to stay quiet, later claimed that Eric was scared of him and knew he was the better musician. Clapton never publicly addressed that jab, but insiders say it only deepened the divide between them. Their partnership had birthed something legendary, but the cost was a relationship so toxic it became irreparable. the philosophical war with Frank Zappa. If Eric Clapton was the high priest of blues rock tradition, Frank Zappa was the heretic who came to burn the temple down. Zappa thrived on dismantling musical norms. He was experimental, provocative, and unapologetically weird. To him, Clapton's devotion to the blues wasn't artistry, it was stagnation. In a biting 1978 interview, Zappa pulled no punches, calling Eric Clapton a safe guitar player with no danger and no art. This wasn't just criticism, it was an insult aimed directly at Clapton's soul. Eric, already weary of critics who questioned his relevance, was furious. He reportedly told a friend that Frank Zappa's music was just noise wrapped in ego, and that none of it meant anything. Their animosity had been brewing for nearly a decade. At the 1969 Love and Peace Festival, Zappa allegedly demanded to perform. Immediately before Clapton, knowing his experimental, chaotic set would be nearly impossible to follow, he told the crew with a smirk that he wanted to see Clapton try to go on after that. Clapton, furious but calculated, didn't take the bait publicly. But privately he seethed. To him, Zappa wasn't a visionary. He was a clown with a guitar. Viewed Zappa's music as deliberately incoherent. A parody of musicianship rather than a product of it, but Zappa kept poking the bear. In interviews, he mocked Clapton's solos as pentatonic exercises, suggesting he'd been recycling the same licks for a decade. Clapton, in turn, labeled Zappa unlistenable, claiming no one he respected actually enjoyed his music. Beneath the jabs was a deeper divide. Clapton believed in tradition, emotion, and the rawness of the blues. Zappa believed in pushing boundaries, dismantling structure, and reprogramming music entirely. Their feud was more than just personal, it was ideological warfare, a microcosm of rock's battle between roots and rebellion. Even after Zappa's death in 1993, Clapton remained tight-lipped. He reportedly told a close friend that he had nothing to say about him that wouldn't be inappropriate. A cold final note in a feud that had never warmed. The Keith Richards betrayal, the feud between Eric Clapton and Keith Richards, had everything. Drugs, betrayal, ego, and a woman who shattered more than just a friendship. Clapton and Richards were never close, but things went nuclear when Clapton made a move that even the wildest rock stars couldn't stomach. He pursued and eventually stole George Harrison's wife, Pattie Boyd. Richards wasn't just appalled, he was furious, called Clapton's actions a snake move, publicly questioning his moral compass and loyalty. To Keith, it wasn't just about romance, it was about honor among friends, and in his eyes, Clapton had broken the code. The musical tension wasn't far behind. Clapton, ever the blues purist, found Richards' raw style sloppy and unfocused. He reportedly called Keith's guitar work lazy and a mess. Richards fired back in interviews, calling Clapton predictable, boring, and completely overrated. Then came the drugs. Both men were deep in the throes of addiction in the 1970s. But instead of bonding over shared demons, they turned on each other. Richards accused Clapton of using heroin as a shield, allegedly telling a bandmate that Eric hides behind drugs. Clapton, not one to take it quietly, snapped back that Keith had been playing the same 5 riffs for 20 years. Their circle of mutual friends was caught in the crossfire. At one point, it got so bad that social events had to be split into 2 camps, one with Clapton, one with Richards. Promoters and producers quietly made sure they weren't booked on the same festivals. There wasn't just tension. There was genuine hatred. The bitterness went beyond personal slights. Richards, always the rebel, thought Clapton had sold out too. Polished, too calculated. Clapton saw Richards as a mess, chaotic, undisciplined, and overrated. Their rivalry was brutal, long-lasting, and deeply personal, rooted not only in betrayal, but in pride. The Jimmy Page eclipse Eric Clapton was once Britain's untouchable guitar deity, hailed as God by graffiti and fans alike. But then came a man who didn't just challenge his throne, he burned it to the ground. That man was Jimmy Page, with his dark mystique, violin bows, and thunderous riffs. Page redefined what it meant to be a guitar hero. Led Zeppelin wasn't just a band. It was a mythological force, Clapton suddenly looked dated, obsolete, left behind. In private, the jealousy simmered. One studio engineer remembered Clapton sneering during a playback session that Jimmy hides behind studio tricks and challenging him to do that live, but Page could do it live, and then some. Zeppelin's albums dominated the charts. Their tours sold out arenas around the world. And as their legacy exploded, Clapton reportedly refused to read any article that compared the two. He knew the truth deep down. The crown had shifted. Former Yardbirds bandmates summed it up with brutal reality. Jimmy took the band Eric abandoned and made it legendary. That haunted Eric, and the wound never truly healed. In later interviews, Clapton took veiled shots at Page, calling his sound clever. With effects but lacking soul, Page responded with a dismissive shrug, branding Clapton a man stuck in the past. This wasn't just a clash of styles. It was a battle for rock immortality. One clung to the old world of blues, the other launched rock into another universe. More Page soared, more Clapton felt eclipsed. The Hendrix devastation, the most devastating blow to Clapton's ego, came on one electric night in 1966. He walked into a smoky London club as the reigning king of British guitarists with swagger, acclaim, and the reverent nickname God. But then, under the dim lights, Jimi Hendrix stepped on stage and rewrote the rules of the guitar in a single set. Clapton stood there stunned as Hendrix tore through his performance, playing behind his back with his teeth, lighting the strings on fire both metaphorically and almost literally. Eric muttered to a friend that it was over and he was finished. A witness said he left halfway through, pale and rattled. The man worshipped for his slow, soulful bends had just seen the future of music. And it was louder, faster, and unapologetically. Wild Clapton had built his world on blues purity, but Hendrix made it feel archaic. Behind closed doors, Eric became obsessed. He dissected Jimmy's licks, tried to emulate his tones, even practiced his stage presence. But in public, he took a different approach. Dismissing Hendrix's brilliance as overindulgent noise, Pete Townshend, another guitar giant, later put it plainly, Eric couldn't handle losing the throne, and he didn't. Clapton stopped attending Hendrix's concerts. Friends said he'd change the radio station if Jimmy came on. It wasn't just rivalry, it was a crisis. Hendrix hadn't merely outplayed him, he had replaced him. When Jimmy died suddenly in 1970, the fans around the world mourned, but Clapton stayed silent. No tribute, no comment, nothing. Years later, in a rare moment of honesty, he confessed what no one expected. He felt relief. The feud had never been verbal. There were no interviews, no diss tracks, but the damage ran deeper than any headline. Hendrix didn't just outshine Clapton. He dismantled the very identity Eric had built his career upon. The legacy of conflict. These weren't just rivalries. They were reflections of Clapton himself. His insecurities, his pride, his pursuit of greatness. Each feud chipped away at the myth of the untouchable guitar god and revealed the man beneath. Proud, wounded, and often at war with his own legend. In the end, the greatest solos come from pain, and Clapton's pain was written not just in lyrics, but in broken friendships, bitter words, and music that echoes with unresolved fury.